Hi, everyone. Welcome to those joining us today. As folks are entering from their waiting room, we'll just give everyone a minute to join us and kick off in about 1 or 2 minutes with our discussion today. Hello, everyone. Welcome. As we get going, could I get a thumbs up or waves maybe from Wanda that you can hear me okay? Okay, wonderful. So hello, my name is Devin Eyre, and I'm the Vice President of Program Strategy and Business Development at Imagine Canada. And it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you all to today's discussion. Before we get going, we would like to take a moment to acknowledge the land that we're all joining from today. Imagine Canada's staff, operations, and our work and our networks depend on traditional Indigenous territories to provide us with physical space, subsistence, safety, and community to live, work, and play. My home and my office is situated on the Halaman Tract, which extends 6 kilometers on either side of the Grand River and is land that was promised to the Haudenosaunee of the Six Nations of the Grand River and is land that is within the territory of the Chinatahan, Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee peoples. We acknowledge that our ability to live and work on these lands today is a direct benefit of the policies of expulsion and assimilation of Indigenous peoples during the time of settlement and confederation and since. The harms of these policies are many, and they're still being felt in Indigenous communities today. We express gratitude towards the Indigenous peoples who have and will continue to steward these lands, and we commit to amplifying the voices of Indigenous peoples and working against the everyday forces of white supremacy and colonialism present in the nonprofit sector. Our team at Imagine Canada is actively engaging in training and education related to reconciliation and decolonization. We aim to listen, to learn, to establish meaningful relationships with our Indigenous sector colleagues, engage in courageous conversations, and take actions that advance reconciliation in the nonprofit sector. Our work at Imagine Canada is long-term and multi-generational in nature, and we recognize that it will be a continuous and intentional process to build strong relationships with our Indigenous colleagues and to connect with the land. The purpose of the discussion today is to provide practical guidance around how the nonprofit sector can be actively involved in truth and reconciliation efforts. Today, we have a lot of great ground to cover. Well, this means we have a really rich discussion planned for you. It also means we don't have a question and answer period planned for the end of the discussion. This meeting is being recorded, and you will receive the recording within a few weeks, along with related resources. Closed captioning is enabled, and if you do have further accessibility questions, please do let us know in the chat. So without further ado, I'd now like to hand the reins over to our wonderful moderator, Wanda Brascoupé, to introduce herself.
Thank you, Devin. My name is Wanda Brascoupé. As Devin has said, I'm a member of the Bear Clan and citizen of the Scotruda and member of the Gitaganzi Anishinaabe. We've given like 3 minutes to say who we are. So some of you who may not know me, just give you a bit of context. My journey really has been shaped by the teachings of my ancestors, much like many Indigenous people. I was blessed to grow up in community in both my parents on my father's side and my mother's side. And being born into the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, that's the grounding of where I come from, combined with the wisdom of my grandparents, great-grandparents. My parents basically instilled a really deep appreciation for the brilliance and ingenuity of all people. And then, switching, like you have to do, the professional stuff. I had a high-tech firm for 22 years, which I founded, and found that relationships was the basis for any type of success in the Western context. I've also been the past ED of the Circle on Philanthropy, and one of the 7 writers of the Philanthropic Declaration of Actions in response to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which will be having a 10-year anniversary next year. I also was the co-founder of the Indigenous Peoples Resilience Fund with Victoria Grant. And it's basically an all Indigenous-led foundation that utilizes Indigenous ways of knowing, being on top of the philanthropic model. Really proud of that. Started that in 2020 through the pandemic. Really, the approach is to cause less harm when you're working with Indigenous communities, whether they be, we worked with the charities and non-qualified donees. I'm also a board member, as many of us are. We hold many hats. I'm a board member currently of the Lawson Foundation and external advisor to the Definity Insurance Foundation, of many organizations that are trying to shift their work, and also an original member of the DIFD, which is youth mental health based out of the Royal in Ottawa. And last but not least, this year, I co-founded with Nicole McDonald, the Indigenous Philanthropy Advisors, of which I'm sitting to as a moderator today. And our goal is to create actionable pathways for this cross-sector philanthropic partnerships, advising private and public foundations, Indigenous organizations, and really working through, trust-based philanthropy approaches in a tangible way, which will actually weave into the conversation that we're having with these amazing 2 that I will share. And last but not least, I'm a mom of 3. Very proud of these 3, and I'm a mother. I'm a mother and a daughter, an aunt, a sister, a cousin, and a wife. And those are probably the most important things that I'm excited about. But without further ado, I really give the minutes to Taya and Mélanie. And I'm going to hand it over to Taya first, if she can introduce herself and the great work.
Hi, everyone. My name is Taya Tootoo. I'm from Iqaluit Nunavut, and my background is Inuk on my father's side, and my mother has regained her Métis status in the recent years from northern Saskatchewan, Buffalo Narrows. And so I am a Pearson College United Rural College alumni. I'm currently the executive director for the Arctic Children Youth Foundation. We're a charity foundation based out of Iqaluit Nunavut. I'm also a mom of 1, and I've been living in Nunavut for the majority of my life.
Thank you for that, Taya. Even though I said Taya, I had Taya written down. My apologies. Mélanie.
Thank you, Wanda. Hello, everyone. My name is Mélanie Valcin. I'm the president and CEO of United for Literacy, formerly known as Frontier College. I'm also a board member of Imagine Canada. I take this opportunity to thank Imagine Canada for hosting this great conversation, this important conversation. And so, yes, I am super excited to be here today because I'm looking forward to learn from Wanda and Taya on, truth and reconciliation. And hopefully I will be able to also offer a few insights. I'm here today because United for Literacy has been working in partnership with First Nation, Métis, and Inuit communities, I would say, for about 40, 50 years. Of course, we've been learning a lot through those amazing partnerships. I like to say that sometimes we don't even understand how much we've learned through these exchanges and partnerships. So yes, I'll be happy to share a little bit more about this today. So United for Literacy, basically, we are a national literacy organizations working in every province and territory to bring literacy supports to individuals, of all ages, children, youth, and adults, to families and to entire communities in some cases. And we really try to go where there's people are underserved. There is not a lot of literacy programming or services, and we really work in partnerships with communities and other institutions that we collaborate with to make sure that the programs we deploy are co-created with the recipients of our activities. So yeah, I'll stop here. I just want to, oh, maybe I'll just add one more thing. My learning journey about the First Peoples of Canada started in 2004. I had the immense privilege to take part in the Governor General Leadership Conference, which took me for the first time in the Yukon for 2 stints of 3 weeks. And there I started to, for the first time again, I started to visit, I had the chance to visit some First Nations communities in the Yukon, and I started to learn about the histories and the culture and the traditions of the First Nations of Canada. And since then, it's been a passion that has been reflected in my work, and I've been fortunate, very fortunate to work for an organization that is that is encouraging a dialogue with all the peoples of this country. So I'll stop here. Thanks, Wanda. Back to you.
Thank you, Mélanie. You know, like many things, when we first got together, we could have recorded that conversation. So Mélanie, you've done more work than what you're humbly saying that you have. This actually allows us to jump into really the first question. And it's for both of you. And you can raise your hand if you're jumping up first, or I can volunteer which one to go first. But as we're talking about today, we're here to reflect on how reconciliation, think about that word reconciliation, what that means to you, is lived out through meaningful action in the nonprofit sector. So we're here to reflect upon that. From both of your perspectives, what does the journey of repair and restoration evoke for you? Mélanie, you were on a roll. So
Yes, happy to go. Thank you. So for me, when I think of the words truth and reconciliation, I think of the word opportunity. I think of an opportunity that actually right now is being lost because we're not at a point where I think we should be when it comes to truth and reconciliation and really understand the true meaning. And once understand it and also put it in action. I know some of you will be familiar with the principles of reconciliation, which are really dear to me because I think sometimes organizations that want to work in partnership or want to get involved in with First Nations, Métis or Inuit communities or institutions do not really know where to start. We'll talk about that later, but those guiding principles for me are a good start for non-Indigenous individuals and communities that want to start to engage and yeah, so I might get into the principles later, but to me, I think of reconciliation because non-Indigenous people really have to get active and stop using kind of the, oh, I don't know where to start and I don't know what to do, and you know, get involved by at minimally get some information, document themselves, learn about history, and then, you know, get involved, attend some events. There's lots of opportunities to learn more and to get involved, and then that will start your journey. I'll stop here, but yes, again, the key words for me that reconciliation evoke is opportunity, learning, and exchange.
love that, Mélanie. You know, you talked about the opportunity, and I think obviously there's lots of opportunity in the North. So Taya, how would you respond to that question?
Pardon me, I was muted. When I think of repair and reclamation, I think I just used the word reclamation, exactly that, is empowerment and autonomy to allow Indigenous peoples from wherever their lands are to have the ability to use their language and it be respected, to have the ability to provide their perspective on cultural and systematic issues and have those be considered. I'm a huge advocate for Indigenous voices, and a part of restoration is allowing Indigenous cultures and Indigenous peoples to have autonomy over their lands, their resources, and their communities. And without that, without supporting the communities, it'll always be a constant struggle. So when I think of restoration, I think of the allyship to be able to hear that some things aren't working and to be able to accept that and say there's other ways to go with things, and to be able to hear things from Indigenous speakers that might not make sense to you in your context, but hearing them means really listening and trying to understand that this perspective comes from a holistic perspective of looking at all areas. So I think of how education, both in culture and in history of colonization, can be extremely empowering, and using that empowerment for advocacy purposes, and to promote, well, in Nunavut, we're trying to promote Inuit in office, Inuit in positions of power. And so we have leaders here that provide training on the history of colonization and the impacts of that, and then to be able to use that to empower the children and the youth to see that there's so much more than what they've been taught. So restoration for me is that reclamation piece, for everyone to kind of find what part works for them and where their values situate at.
Great response, really. I haven't actually heard that you moved from reconciliation to reclamation, and also the action of responsibility. You know, Taya, thinking about that, can you share how Inuit culture and Inuit society values guide the work of the Arctic Children and Youth Foundation?
Sure. So I forgot in my introduction to introduce what the organization I work for does. Arctic Children Youth Foundation, ACYF, is a charity organization that houses two current programs. We have the Umingmuk Center, which is a child and youth advocacy center, which works with children who have experience of exposure or abuse. And different levels of trauma. So we provide counseling, advocate services. And then we also have the Kupnuak office, and Kupnuak office started by supporting families in applying to Inuit Child First Initiative, which is a close equivalent to Jordan's Principle, if anyone's aware of that program. And what we had started was families weren't able to access that initiative and that funding. So we provided supports and navigation and application build, as well as procurement, because one of the barriers of a funding program is to expect families who need funding to pay for those resources themselves and then get reimbursement. They wouldn't be applying if they had the funds to pay for them upfront in the first place. And so one of the values I think that ACYF really focuses on is meeting people where they're at, you know, really trying to take a step back from what Western or colonial perspectives expect of people, expect of their level of education, their level of English, also their level of where they're at in their social structure, especially when it comes to levels of poverty, which we experience quite frequently with our clientele here. And so those are our two offices. They work directly in trauma and social inequities and poverty, and I've seen the teams over the years, just the level of commitment. I think one thing that we really value is that our staff have the same sort of lived experience as our clientele. So one, it's really important for us as an organization to support our clients, to allow children and youth to thrive in their environments. But also we recognize that if we're not supporting our staff properly, then they can't further support their community. And so we have ensured to provide different services, in-house counseling for all of our staff as they work in high-level vicarious trauma work. And we do constant debriefs, and we've also, I think the biggest thing is we do have an organizational structure, but for us, it still comes down to sitting at the table with everyone in the org and starting our day together and just checking in on each other of, hey, how are you doing? And making sure that we know kind of where everyone's at during the day. And that allows us to know how much work can I expect from you? And how much pressure do I want to not put on you today because you have enough going on? So again, we're meeting our clients where they're at, and we're meeting our staff where they're at without judgment, so that staff can come to work without fear of being reprimanded, because they have hardships at home as well. And so they need to be able to come to work if they need to get away from home, and they need to know it's a safe space. And I mean, I could talk about way more ways, but I'm wondering if there's a question that comes up before I continue on.
No, you know what? The reality is that what you're talking about is you're talking about the values of how you work. And you've explained it eloquently in the fact that you have humility. You meet people where they're at, whether it be your clients or your staff. But more importantly, you understand the brilliance of the Inuit people around you that might not otherwise be seen as brilliant in a Western context. So you answered it, I think, in my view, perfectly and beautifully. We're going to go to you, Mélanie, because you have, you've worked together, and you've done this, Frontier, and now the organization, or the last over 40 years, you've worked it in such a way that you have kind of moved from, you've talked about moving from meaningful support, or the concept of meaningful support, but actually doing it. And so kind of drilling down on your earlier statement a little bit more.
Thank you so much, Wanda. And when I was hearing you, Taya, my eyes were, lightening up, because you're also, I wanted to echo a lot of things that you just mentioned. I'll take the example of the work that we do in Nunavut, but first I'll say United for Literacy, Frontier College back in the day, is working currently with about 120 or 30 First Nation, Métis, and Inuit communities across the country. In different capacities. Sometimes it's in a training, like we support with training. Other times we literally hire people and deploy initiatives in communities. And I was just thinking of that first, when Wanda, you asked Taya, how does the Nunavut or Inuit culture infuse the work that you're doing in your organization, Taya? I was thinking, again, what a privilege we've had at United for Literacy to be able to benefit from all this wisdom and knowledge. A lot of the staff that we hire, and it has not always been the case, let's face it, let's be honest. Back in the day, maybe in 40, 50 years ago, we were hiring people and sending them to communities, all in good faith. But we know that sometimes the result might not be exactly what you want to accomplish if there's no if the people that you're hiring are not necessarily from the culture that they get immersed in. It doesn't mean that it's wrong. It's just you need to make sure that you have the right structure to train them and support them around this in their work. But more and more nowadays, I would say in our summer programs, for example, last summer, about 80% of our staff are from the local communities. So we get to create meaningful employments in communities, but also we get to support and bring our expertise, while also benefiting from a return of expertise from our local staff that are very, of course, knowledgeable about their culture, their terrain, their community. So yes, I wanted to go back to this whole concept of exchange and talk about the fact that, yes, I was going to this Nunavut example. When we think about Nunavut culture, Nunavut history, we've seen so many times how when we have our local camp counselors, for example, in our summer programs, talk about the history that they that have been passed from generations, the principles that are guiding their communities and their leadership and themselves too. It's kind of bringing such rich, so much more richness to the work that we do or that we're trying to accomplish, because it's not a one-way, oh, here we're coming with this, for example, summer camp model or this tutoring programs, and this is how we're going to do it. We're saying, okay, we have worked in literacy for a long time. your community, your culture, the way that the youth and adults are learning as well. How do we work together to make this brilliant, culturally sensitive and needs-oriented solution, if I can say, or program? And so more and more, we've noticed that as every time, like we're only going to be as successful as the our success is based on the fact that we can collaborate and learn and incorporate from our partners on the ground and our staff on the ground. And yeah, I think this is the only way to go. I'm giving a bit too much detail maybe, but I'm just thinking of organizations that are non-Indigenous and that are starting to work with Indigenous communities or institutions. And I think like sometimes it might sound difficult or be difficult to start, hiring locally, go in communities to train, but to learn at the same time. So I think I'm trying to invite you to take those first steps, all of you out there. Yes.
So I appreciate the first step. So let's kind of hit on that, because there is intention, there's people that are looking to do this work. There definitely is a desire, but we do work in silos and in our own organizations, and our network may or may not be as vast as yours, and your 40 years of working and your organization's 40 years. Just out of curiosity, do you have any internal metrics that you use? Is that part of, and would you mind just expanding on that a little bit?
You're talking to me?
Yes, Mélanie.
Yeah, of course. Yes, we do. So at United for Literacy, measuring our impact is very important. I'll say this is very important, and we've been working at it for many, many years. And it's a process that is, for me, evaluation is constantly changing. And so it's interesting that you asked this question now at this point in our history, because we have a great, I will say, evaluation framework in which we're able to measure our impact by, for example, we have this summer camp program that runs in partnership with 100 communities where kids have fun all summer, but they also read and write and are exposed to oral history all summer long. And so we surveyed our campers, we survey the parents of our campers, the leadership of the communities that we work with, to see how, to measure our impact, teachers as well, educators when kids are going back to school. And we thought we nailed it, right? Like it's been years now. So we're like, oh, we're able to demonstrate our impact, and we are. And I'm very proud of that fact. Having said that, just recently we started to talk with the Indigenous researchers and evaluators. And they were like, wow, great work. We love what you're doing. Continue to do so. But we might have a few insights for you to start incorporating other ways that might be more culturally sensitive, or that will go get, it's not that our things are not culturally sensitive, but like tools and processes where you can really get even deeper into the impact that you're having, because they would be more appropriate for the communities that you're working with, if I can say. So it's really important, because we're on a journey, all of our organizations, and I think it's always about making sure that you stay current and that you never stop thinking, I got this right. Go further, be more curious, and then you start meeting more people, getting more insights that will then benefit your work and the way, in this case, that you evaluate your activities and your progress. Am I answering your question?
You are answering, and Taya is shaking her head. So I'm just going to throw it to you just for a couple more minutes to add on that.
Of course. Make sure I'm on mute. We actually just completed a caregiver research project because we had found that a lot of the work we were doing with children wasn't being followed through at home. And so we tried to engage with caregivers in many different ways. And it wasn't a successful endeavor. So we actually completed a research project in partnership with the Community Actions Lab at University of Toronto. And what came out of that at the end, we actually tried an oral evaluation of the research project, where we sat with all the researchers involved to talk about the feelings and the impacts of the program throughout. And what I've learned in my studies as a university student in research, is really that there's always good ways to do ways, but to be able to sit back and say there could be better ways, and especially important if you're an ally working in an Indigenous or a community where you're a minority per se, just in context, and you're not used to that culture. It's so important that you put a lot of listening time to those researchers who have more of that experience, because what I've learned is anyone coming up to do research in any Indigenous background, if they're not within that Indigenous background, they're still only taking away a perspective. And it really comes down to, like, I've seen the struggles of Indigenous researchers, and it's really difficult to be a researcher because it's a Western concept, and colonization, anthropology, archaeology really impacted how colonization furthered itself, and researchers had a huge part to play in that. So I witnessed how hard it is to be in that, and how important it is to say, hey, this is great, but there's still more work to be done. And Mélanie, to be able to accept that and to incorporate that is really impressive, because a lot of people have a hard time hearing that. And it's not meant to be offensive. It's not meant to be criticized. It's more, there's so much more we can do. Things never end. I think that's what you were saying. Like, you start somewhere and it's great, and it can only grow greater if I can.
Sure. Wanda, do you allow me just to say something?
Sure, sure. You got a minute.
Yeah, no, real quick. I just want to say, Taya, thank you for sharing this. And I think also that the word, a word that comes to mind when you, after what, to respond to what you just said, is trust as well. So I think that you can, once you're able to build trust, it's not easy and it takes time, but once trust is there, then whether it's in research or in evaluation or in program deployment, co-design of programming, I think everything kind of becomes possible, because there's trust that everyone's there in good faith, and that is going to contribute to the best of their abilities, but just, yeah, without expecting something in return, but and at the same time, you get a lot in return. I don't know if I'm being clear, but I just wanted to bring the word trust in the conversation, because I think that like in any partnerships or in any work, in terms of nonprofit work, it's a very important concept.
No, you're right. I completely agree. The trust-based part is, we talk about trust-based philanthropy, we talk about, but it's the actionability of it. And like we talked about earlier, even during our earlier conversations, the silos of which we work. And what I mean by silos is like our offices, and we're doing this virtually, and today we have 570 Imagine members that have logged on. So obviously it's important, right? It's important. It's right. And just so you all know, it's one of the largest, or the largest webinar that Imagine has hosted. So we have the intention. Collectively, we have the intention. And I want to just talk a little bit about this rethinking of colonial and Western mindsets. This is like my bag. I love this stuff. This is really, the question is for both of you. So the question is, Western and colonial mindsets are dominant. Okay, we can seep into organizations even when we, or you are trying to advance reconciliation, reclamation, reciprocity, whatever the RE is for you. What would you do concretely and recommend? What would you recommend to concretely push against these ways of thinking? So I love the question that it says concretely. So basically what it's asking is, how I'm sitting in my office, I'm in Toronto, I'm in Calgary, I'm in BC, I'm in Montreal. I have this on my docket. It is important emotionally to me, and it is important to the work that we do. But I have these, what we talked about earlier was knowing ways of being within the philanthropic model is generally a power over rather than a power with, although there are definitely people that are at the bow of the ship. And Imagine itself Imagine itself as this organization is trying to guide this part of the ship and bringing people along. So what are some tangible, you're sitting in your office, what would you share, recommend, highlight? Whoever wants to go first. Hey, Taya.
Right. I have a really great example of a moment in our office that we kind of realized how to make a significant shift, and it won't be a quick or easy fix. But we had, when I was moving out of my managerial position into administration, we had hired a new manager to come in. And while I was working with her, she often got questioned in bigger meetings. And I'd say, hey, I know you know the answer. And she just never felt comfortable speaking out. Now, this woman is Inuk like myself, but I am much fairer in skin. And so, and my first language is English. And so I was able to speak. And afterwards, we sat and we were debriefing and saying, what could we do to make you more comfortable to speak in these kind of like Western settings of massive meetings with bigger partners? And she said, well, you know, I have to translate everything that everyone's saying into Inuktitut, and then I have to translate what I want to say back into English. And by time I have those translations done, people have already continued on the conversation and my comment is no longer relevant. And so what our office has actually done is set a goal in the next 3 to 5 years to move to be completely in Inuktitut dominant as the first language spoken in the office. I find this really important because it will really promote Inuit employment, which is one of my utmost importance to show people that they are capable and they can do the work that we're doing. And I don't want language to be a barrier, but it's also important because without language, you don't understand a culture. And I'm saying that also myself, speaking as a Inuk person and a Métis woman who doesn't know either of her first languages, Cree or Inuktitut. And I am learning Inuktitut actively right now, again, supported through our organization. But to understand a culture really is understanding language and a way of thinking, because the way of thinking comes out in the way you speak. And and any ally will never truly have the same comprehension unless they can hear it and say it and understand it in that same way that it would be spoken to them. And so in our office, one of the most important things that we're focusing on is trying to make sure that everyone gets Inuktitut training. It doesn't matter what level you start at, but ensuring that we promote the language of our people here to ensure that, again, going back to trust, when it comes to our clients, they can trust that they can communicate and what they're saying will be taken accurately and it will be respected and appreciated, especially when it comes to the trust in systems. The other piece that comes to mind is a simple thing that we do in our office is we never leave messages. We never leave emails. We always answer the phone or the door. And the reason for that is there's a huge history in Nunavut specifically that I'm aware of, where Inuit would go to the hospital or they'd go somewhere for a service to a government office or the public service, and they'd get told they'd be put on a list and they'd be waiting years and never hear back, and only to find out that they actually got left off the list or the list disappeared or they were never on the list. So there's a history of being forgotten. So in terms of the trust and respect for the people that we are working with, we don't want them to question that they're being ignored. We don't want them to feel like they're not being listened to and that their concerns aren't valid. And so that's one thing we strive to really make sure is that we respond to our emails on time. we answer the phone even when it's the same client calling 3 times a day asking the same question because they're nervous, because we can understand why they're nervous. There's a history to it, and that's really important in our office.
That's a fantastic example. For those of you who've known me since I've been working in philanthropy, what I realized early on was that the English language or the French language is our greatest asset, but it's also our weakest link completely. It doesn't matter what nation I'm speaking to. It just, the translation is not there. So we're working in a sector, or we're trying to partner in a sector that we do have trust, but there also is, reporting. Like, you need to report. So, and how do you report? So it leads to, again, this, what is success and what is working and what isn't working, and what is working probably in where you are, Taya, wouldn't necessarily work or should work. And so shifting that mindset. So to you, Mélanie, what have you, under even just taking an example or under your leadership or a story beforehand, how do you as an ally organization try to concretely push away, or at least remember that this mindset exists?
Work in progress, of course, all the time, Wanda. And I will say that it's the entire organization that has the credit for any kind of advancements and understanding that we've been able to contribute. Yeah. So I'll say I have a few examples coming to mind over the years. Again, with our summer camp programs, for example, or with other programs that we run in partnership with the First Nation or with Indigenous communities. It became apparent, I would say, and back in 2005 or 6, so it's been, a good 20 years that we're like, hey, one second, if we're going to send resources to the communities that we work with, books and activity books and activity guides, I think they should reflect the local culture and the language as much as possible. So over the years, we've really made a huge not that of an effort, it's normal, but a normal effort, I will say, to reach out to Indigenous publishers, Indigenous authors, so that we can really find, when I work in Nunavut, we're going to reach out to Inhabit Media, for example, Taya, and buy books there and use those books in our programs. Same for other parts of the country. But so that became really a habit, of course, in our organization. We don't want to use resources that are not culturally relevant. But then a few years ago, maybe 2-3 years ago, we're like, okay, it's great. We're buying resources and we're always on the lookout for resources that are culturally relevant for our partners, for our programs. But we're like, what about the resources that we produce, right? So it's always like, oh, we have this financial literacy resource, for example, in English and then in French. And we're like, but we have so many partners, for example, that speak Ojibwe in Northern Ontario. So yes, we started in our funding proposal to ask for dollars for translation so that we can hire local translators, and the resources that we're using can be translated when it makes sense in an Indigenous language. Every year we host a national forum on a different topic that relates to literacy. This year is literacy and immigration, if anyone is interested. But we also make sure, some years we've had the funds to translate our discussion paper for our forum in Inuktitut. If you follow us on social media, you'll see that we often translate promotional material for those forums in Inuktitut, this year in another language as well. So we're really trying to consciously and continuously make sure that we produce resources, or we use resources in our programming that are culturally relevant. So that's what comes to mind as an example, as a small example. But on a broader level too, it's very important for me and for everyone in the organization to not to be like, oh, the staff that work in partnership with the Indigenous communities will get cultural safety training, for example, or they'll get a bit more training on. we've passed that stage. Now it's really cool actually, because we get to all our staff, whether they're in, administration, finance, HR, or program staff, everyone gets trained together when we have a guest trainer that comes to talk to us about, different aspects of collaborations with Indigenous communities. Everyone is together, so it's an organizational thing. It's not just a programmatic thing when it comes to learning more about the First Peoples of Canada and how we can work together to create a rich exchange. So yeah, I'll stop here. But
Oh, no, that's a really great, both of you have weaved together the differences, but yet the similarities of working in two different organizations, but also in two very, kilometers and kilometers apart, and two very different parts of what we call Canada. The reminder for me is that there are guidelines that exist out there that have been written by Indigenous peoples. There's anything from Decolonizing Wealth by Edgar Villanueva to some really interesting work that the International Funders for Indigenous Peoples have done, and guidelines that exist out there. The Circle has guidelines as well. So utilizing those resources to, like you had said, utilizing the research, and so important, your point on storytelling. It is significant. And then the translation piece is actually quite remarkable. So for me, now I go for being at the bow, what I call the bow of the ship on this shifting. Our time is going by fast. And but I really want to think about this, the takeaways. So we've hit on numerous things, meeting people where they're at. We've hit on lots of humility in your work, lots of learning and relearning. It's a little bit like R&D, right? Like you go back, you look at it again, 6 months, you look at it again, rather than saying, Mélanie, that we got it right. Yes, we've been doing this for 40 years, so we got it right. The thread of humility and always trying to learn and be better is pretty significant in this sector that we're working in. But so really it's a question for the both of you. And they can be big, they can be small, they can be whatever it is that you want to share. Of what insights or reflections would you like to share with this huge group of those that are listening today to continue building and understanding and fostering meaningful relationships, to create that change that we all have this desire to do on a daily basis? Anybody want to go first?
maybe I'll go and leave the last words to Taya. There's two things that come to mind. First, the big word that my message to any non-Indigenous organization wanting to do some work in partnership with the Indigenous community or people or institution is, I won't say the word, but it's about stop talking, listen. I think this is the key word, like listen, and then be present. So listening and be present, being present are the two key for us, I think, to be able to keep on moving forward, keep on enriching our practice, keep on being good allies, and improving also as being partners and allies, because again, this is a process. It's not a finality. But yes, I think these are the two recommendations: listen and be present, and also as soon as you take a first steps towards if you don't know where to start, there's a friendship center in every community almost, so go through the door or send the staff and see, like, what are the programs being offered here? Are there conferences? So you just got to take a first step and be open, and then usually people come towards you and are curious to see what you have to offer, right? So these would be my recommendations. The other thing that might be a bit more involved work, but one thing that we've started to do, and again, it's a journey, and we're just getting started. We've actually gone through a team of a group of our staff have gone through the recommendation, the PRC recommendations, calls to action, to see what else, or how can we contribute more, and where are we doing okay, but we're also, there's a space for us to do something and to answer this call to action, but we're not active yet. So I think this is a good exercise to do as an organization as well. If you really want to be a good ally and a contributor, again, not to guilt us out or say like, oh, we have all this work to do. It's more to see like, okay, what are the first few things that I could do, like making sure my staff gets trained on what it means, this concept of truth and reconciliation, starting to, as I said, making sure that you're using the right resources in your activities if you interact with First Nations, Indigenous people. So yeah, I just think that kind of taking those concepts and those calls to actions and seeing how you as an organization, or even as an individual or as a leader, if you're the leader of the organization, how you can put them in practice in your organization, I think is a good start as well. So going from theory to practice, baby steps at a time. And also, I just said the word time, this takes time, you know? In a way, there's no time. I feel there's an emergency, like we have to start acting way faster, because again, we're losing opportunities of collaboration and but at the same time, let's take the time to get to know each other and to see how together we can create the Canada that we want, where everybody has a place, and where the gap between Indigenous kids and non-Indigenous kids when it comes to health and education, etc., is getting smaller.
Really beautiful. Thank you, Mélanie. You know, this, your comment earlier really weaves into this of there's not one way to look at success, right? There's not just one way. You continue to look at it. And Taya, can I send it over to you? What would you want people to take away from today?
So I've actually really enjoyed when, after both of us speak, Wanda, you kind of bring in the word humble, because I think the ability that, like, what Mélanie is talking about is very much like you have to be humble to accept that, to be able to walk into things uncomfortably, knowingly uncomfortable, and to be able to be okay with being uncomfortable, to be able to learn, to expand. So I think taking a step back away from internal ego of, oh, I can't do that, or that doesn't feel right, to be like, I'm not sure what to do, and I'm going to be open about this. I'm going to be open that I don't know what to do. I'm going to laugh at myself if I make a mistake, and I'm going to keep trying. I think that's really important. But I also think, like, another thing I was thinking of as you were speaking, Mélanie, is the like, going back to language. You do not have to know the language of wherever you're at, but if someone is struggling to communicate with you, it's your job to find a translator versus expecting them to translate to English. So I think that's really important. That's something every office can do. And I know it's a big expenditure, because we have to translate everything. And in all of our meetings, we have to have translators and interpreters present to translate in real time. And it's a big expense, but something as little of ensuring that people can speak their mind the way they need to is really important, because you miss out on so much when you rely on just English. And I know that firsthand as an English speaker. I can say a lot, I can be articulate, but there's so much that I still don't know in terms of wisdom. My societal values, they come with language. I'm sitting in front of, we have 8 societal values. And what I've learned in my years at this organization with different mentors and different board members is that they actually break out from 8 different values to millions different ways of describing connection, support, and what it means to be a community. And what our Inuit societal values really mean is really to how do we care for one another, not just us as humans, but for the land and our environment, for the animals that give to us and help protect us, and for the waters that take us places. That level of respect comes through our values in everything we do. And so going back to even the first question, I was talking to a colleague today about it, and we were both like, it's really hard to explain everything that we do in our work that encapsulates Inuit societal values, and that's because it's natural. When, like, whether it's a religion you follow, a value system, a belief system, or if you're spiritual, it always comes down to values of how you want to be treated and how you want to treat others. Again, outside of just human to human connection. And I really think that being able to kind of open your mind, it's really difficult because you can have really strong opinions, but being able to kind of take a step back and not having to change your opinion, but to be able to hear someone else's opinion and take that in and to be able to reflect on it, to see how that impacts how your behavior and how you do things going forward.
Beautiful. I don't really have much to add because that was a really wonderful bow that you put on it. You know, before I hand it over to Devin, we're all beginners. We've all been beginners. And I'm a beginner, like I'm a mother. My oldest is 26, should be 27. Well, you know what? I'm a beginner of a mother at 27 years old, right? So and I'm also a beginner because it's another child. So being a beginner is not something to, you know, in this world of I'm the master of this, I'm a success of that, I'm this. We're all beginners at some point in a continuum in our lives. And that really resonated for me, Taya. And then utilizing the brilliance of organizational psychology, whether you use that in your organizations, there's Western brilliance and then there's Indigenous brilliance and bonding that together. It's really been a pleasure to get to know both of you through this. So thank you to Imagine Canada. Thank you for your words of wisdom and your inspiration and your pushiness and your pullness and your boundaries and your humility of how to engage in a good way. So Nyawagoa, Devin, I'll give it back to you.
Great. Wow. And yeah, to echo Wanda, thank you to our guest speakers today, Mélanie and Taya, and of course, Wanda, to you, our wonderful moderator today. We just have tremendous gratitude for you all for sharing your knowledge, your expertise, your humility, and also concrete examples of action with us today. Yeah. Now, during the registration process today, there was an opportunity for folks to donate when you signed up. And a big thank you to those who chose to make a donation. The funds will be going to an Indigenous organization that will be chosen by our panelists, and we'll provide an update about that in your post-event email, which will also include a full recording of the event today. For Imagine Canada members on the call today, we will be keeping this conversation going about reconciliation, a lot of learning and relearning as we talked about today. Very specifically, though, in the short term, within the realm of advocacy at our next policy chat in October. So please check your email for more information about that upcoming talk. And again, thanks to, finally, thanks to everyone for attending and making time and space in your schedule and your calendars today to listen and to learn about the sector's role in truth and reconciliation. We very much appreciate you being with us here today. And please enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.